With the 7th annual Kombinatas festival fast approaching, we are sharing some highlights from the last year's main stage. Today we invite you to listen to Daria Krivonos and Daria Tarkhova's presentation called How the EU Border Regime Instrumentalizes Migration. Have a good listen.
Hello. So we are Darias. I'm Daria and this is other Daria. We are very happy to be here. Thanks a lot to the organizers for this fantastic event. It's the first time we're here, but we heard many great things about this place and this event. So we are going to talk about the Russian-Finnish border, hopefully connecting to other borders, other EU borders and other struggles. Actually, our initial presentation was called How the EU Border Regime Instrumentalizes Migration. And it's a little bit like provocative title because our idea here was to shift the attention from like this discourse where authoritarian states like Russia or Belarus are the ones who instrumentalize migration. And in our talk, we would like to shift the attention towards the EU border regime, which actually creates unequal mobility rights and this kind of global regime of apartheid, where people have unequal access to mobility. And actually also our presentation connects nicely to what Kamal was discussing yesterday in his talk, in their talk about the colonial histories of Europe and how we can think of borders through like post-colonial regimes. And so kind of in our understanding, the ways in which coloniality works today, one of the ways through which coloniality works today is exactly through the EU border regime. And at the same time, also our talk connects to many points raised by Airi earlier this morning, where they also discuss how the state uses the threat from the east to suppress the left and actually to suppress any kind of forms of social dissent. So we are kind of connecting these two talks in our presentation.
All right, so we decided to start without the slides, so hope we can be verbally clear then. So as in many places in Finland, a lot of things changed after Russia invaded Ukraine in full-scale way in 2022. And one of the events following that was that in 2023 we started getting news about asylum seekers on a Russian-Finnish border. I think it was at least mentioned that some of them were from Syria, and it was mentioned that Russian government pays them to go to the Finnish border, including providing them with bicycles. And this was also very interesting that many of them were on bicycles because it's not allowed to cross the border by foot. We have here in the first slide a mention, the headline that says, Eastern border quiet. Prime Minister describes Russian operation as a hybrid attack. So following this news, the Finnish high-level politicians started calling this hybrid warfare and started saying that the Russian government is using these asylum seekers to put pressure on Finland and to threaten Finland. So following this news, what happened was that the Finnish government decided to close the eastern border. First they closed only some of the crossing points, and then after a bit of time they closed all of them. And also there were some They didn't decide to close them all completely at first. They first said, okay, we're going to do it for like some weeks, and then extended, and then did this exception law for which it has been now closed since then. There were 8 crossing points from the south to the very north, and all of them have been closed so far. And also we have this photo that we cannot show you, but it's a Finnish prime minister in a helicopter with Ursula von der Leyen from the EU overlooking the Finnish empty forest, showing the dangers on the Finnish-Russian eastern border. So this is kind of the base of what was happening in 2023.
Yeah, and then Ursula von der Leyen gave a press conference in the border town of Lappeenranta, where she said that it's not only Finland, but we are in this together. So it was not, as often happens, kind of framed as a national issue, but a broader EU security issue, because Finland and Russia share a common border. This was in 2023 when the Finnish border was closed, but already in 2021 the Polish border guard recorded a sharp increase in the number of asylum seekers trying to cross the border with Poland, and then nearly 40,000 people attempted to cross the border in 2021, compared to over 130 a year earlier. Also similar situation, as you know, occurred in Latvia and Lithuania. But what is interesting here... Actually, can you show me this slide so I can see what I'm talking about? So what is important here for us is kind of how the language of hybrid warfare and the language of instrumentalized migration kind of quickly became normalized among, in the public discourse, but also among even some human rights activists and also among some academics, and we're going to show examples of that. So it really became normalized, even though the term instrumentalized migration does not exist in the international law, but now it became kind of a social fact. Recent EU Border Act uses this term instrumentalized migration as though it is it's already there, even though kind of research shows that many people trying to get via Belarus or Polish-Belarusian border or Russian-Finnish border, they actually sometimes are not even in touch with the local authorities, but these are often private companies that issue visas and kind of create this tourist packages for people to come to the border. And it's also interesting that at the same time there were some violent pushbacks in Croatia happening at exactly the same time, but somehow it didn't gain as much attention as the situation at the Polish-Belarusian border, and I think it's because you could use this authoritarian regime, Lukashenko, kind of as quickly kind of shifting the blame into Lukashenko, instrumentalizing again migration. And here we also kind of draw attention again to the language and kind of trying to think what do the words do. And we already know from people who organize around migrants' rights, but also from academics, kind of how, for example, the language of refugee crisis is also becoming productive. So because something is framed as crisis, then it justifies kind of and expands militarized and security complex. So even though the numbers, for example, in Finland in 2015, during so-called refugee crisis, over 30,000 people arrived to Finland. Even though it's not such a big number compared to other countries, still it was kind of framed as a refugee crisis. And since something becomes a crisis, then it justifies justifies this expanded militarized security agenda. So it's really kind of exceptionalizes the situation. So, and then looking at the developments in the Polish-Belarusian border, Finnish government, which is important to say, which was led by the time by Social Democrats, introduced the Emergency Act, which would allow in cases of emergency to close the border and close the checkpoints. And I think also Airi again was saying in the morning that kind of who we tend to think as our kind of enemy, that it's not only kind of the far right, but also some, like for example, social democrats can also introduce kind of anti-immigration agendas. So we can really find racist policies pushed across the political spectrum. So I think it's really important not to think of these policies as being introduced only by the far right. And then later, yes, Finland completely suspended the right to seek asylum on the eastern border in 2024. And then it's interesting that in 2025, Poland also followed suit. And it's interesting here that here kind of Finland's reputation was used as a justification for Poland to suspend the right to seek asylum. Because, well, at least when I was talking also to people working on this and organizing around these issues in Poland, they were saying that kind of, the discourse there was that, because Finland is such a kind of good country and it respects human rights and it's like Western and Scandinavian and all this that kind of Poland, it's not doing anything wrong because Finland already did something like that. And if Finland did it, then we are totally kind of legitimate to introduce these laws. Then we would have a slide which would show you also some like numbers and the campaign by the Freedom of Movement Network, where we are also part of, who also actually showed like very nicely how between just to compare, people who sought asylum at the eastern border in November 2023 were only like 1,000 people, and comparing it with March 2022, also with 1 month a year earlier, 15,000 Ukrainian refugees got international protection in Finland. So it's really not about numbers, but also about the political will to kind of give access to only certain types of mobilities. Yes, and so in 2024, yes, Finland introduced this act on temporary measures to combat instrumentalized migration. And again, this language of instrumentalized migration, it just kind of became part of the law. And the purpose was to prevent efforts to put pressure on Finland through this language, instrumentalized migration. And it was accepted with a grand majority in the Finnish parliament. And it was also quite interesting to observe, like, for example, in 2021, some discussion in Finland, kind of how the public was looking at the developments in the Polish-Belarusian border, but also how Trump was promising to build the beautiful wall with Mexico. Kind of then, for the Finnish public, it was seen as something like really exceptional, all this like crazy post-communist states, they're this inherently authoritarian, and Trump is also this crazy guy who is like building with his wall. But then, already in 2023, also Finland started building the wall with Russia under the pretext of kind of protecting itself from instrumentalized migration. So it really became very normalized. But what we want to do in this talk and really to look into these developments on the eastern borders of the EU as part of the kind of the larger EU border regime and this carceral complex, which is like one among many developments of kind of pushing people off the borders of the EU and preventing them from seeking international protection. And there are many examples to that, as you probably know. For example, Spain in 2015 legalized the act, the legal act which legalized the pushbacks and its land borders in North Africa around Ceuta and Melilla. You probably know that in the North Africa there are these two cities, Ceuta and Melilla, which are actually part of Spain or part of the EU, and these are kind of external borders of the EU, and they are heavily fortified and militarized, and these are usually the places where people from the African continent are trying to cross the border to the EU. So in 2015, Spain legalized pushbacks. Then the routes through Canary Islands. Again, Canary Islands were also seen. I mean, they are part of the EU, and they were seen also as the route, as the western route to get to the European Union. And actually, it's quite interesting to think of how we usually think of the EU. It's not really this kind of bounded borders, on the land only, but there are all these islands actually around the world, also even in the Canary Islands, which and the land border with North Africa, which are really being used to kind of push people back. Then the eastern route via Turkey was also closed. Then there was put a fence with Serbia. Route to Croatia via Albania. So we see this gradual and consistent investment in fortifying EU borders. So, and we're saying that just to say that kind of the developments at the Polish-Belarusian border or Finnish-Russian border or Lithuanian-Latvian borders are not really exceptional, because people are always seeking new ways to get to safety. And if it kind of finally reached eastern borders of the EU, it shouldn't come as a surprise, but as part of this kind of much longer history of militarizing the EU border regime, which is actually being completely, I think, taken out of the context. And then here, of course, Russia and the war with Ukraine and kind of this threat from the east becomes this a very nice excuse to justify racist policies. So you can even become supposedly non-racist or even anti-racist by supposedly protecting asylum seekers from being brought by Russia. Yes, and it's also important to think about how EU borders are being externalized, and I give this one example with Ceuta and Melilla. But also in 2012, there was this agreement between Russia and Finland on the promotion of cross-border cooperation. And there, the idea was that Russian border guards would be checking the documents of anyone who would be approaching the border. So if you ever traveled from Russia to Finland by bus, you would kind of experience that even long before you would approach the border or the checkpoint, they would stop the car, stop all the vehicles, and make sure that whoever is approaching the border has the passport, the international passport, and the visa, the Schengen visa to cross the border. So this can also be regarded as a form of externalization of EU border controls and putting the responsibility on Russian border guards on making sure that they already start doing this kind of dirty work of stopping people from crossing the border. But then it was this cooperation was breached in 2024 after the start of the full-scale invasion, and also after Finland joined NATO. And I think it's really kind of it's important also to think kind of how there are these EU cooperations with many states, as we know, but also including Russia, when Russian border guards were already also making sure that nobody would approach the border without documents.
Yes, and this all happens in the historical context of Finnish self-identification through the difference from Russia. Already since the birth of Finnish nationalism in the 18th century, kind of Finnish nation state was created as something that is inherently different from Russia and inherently different from the East. This also fits into this kind of grand narrative of the clash of Western and Eastern civilizations, Orientalism. We can mention many things in this. So the kind of the historical context really builds up into that, and these kinds of border policies were only possible because there were these histories of othering and histories of difference.
Yeah, and here we had a map from Samuel Huntington, who just like really decided where this kind of civilizational border is. And there you can see that also part of Belarus actually belongs to the Western civilization, same as Ukraine, part of Western Ukraine and Romania. So yes, and of course it's kind of it's written in a very kind of orientalizing ways, that there is this Orthodox Christianity and Islam on one hand, and then Western Christianity on the other, and one is more superior to the other. Yes, and I think I also, among some circles and like among some academics, after 2022, I heard people saying that kind of, but Samuel Huntington was critiqued for so long for his like Orientalism and everything, but actually like he was right that this is like the clash of civilizations. So again, like this clash of civilizations narrative kind of made a comeback in a very kind of uncritical ways. Yeah.
Also, it's probably worth mentioning that the same discourse is also used in Russia, especially now in the authoritarian regime, by kind of saying that Russia offers an alternative to Western version of modernity that has gone wrong. So now we have kind of the Russian conservative modernity and Western modernity. So Russia also uses the same discourse of different civilizations. So as we said before, this kind of border regime is also an effort of Finland to show that we are part of Europe, that we are not kind of bowing down to the authoritarian East, and that we are part of the West. And it's also an example of how geopolitics can act as a hierarchization of people in a certain point of time. So there are scholars, Julia Kekstaite and Robin van der Voort, sorry for mispronouncing probably, that have described how actually in Lithuania, racialized border regime first was very welcomed for people from Belarus to escape their authoritarian government, but after, I don't remember what was exactly the event, what led to this, but then I think after Belarus allowed Russia to use its territory for military base, for Russia, then the kind of humanitarian corridor for people from Belarus was closed. And this is an example of how black and brown bodies that were coming before were kind of excluded from this humanitarianism from the beginning, but perceived as white or subaltern white bodies coming from Belarus at first were allowed in, but then because of geopolitical event, this corridor was also closed, because there's still a way to hierarchize them as not worthy of protection.
Yeah, and actually, maybe I could add here also about Belarus. I think it's such a good example which shows kind of how this like borders or this also constructions of whiteness can be shifting. If like in 2020, many people like in Western media were like kind of celebrating Belarus as kind of part of Europe, and this like people fighting against authoritarian regimes for democracy, kind of they're like us. there were some opportunities for people to get humanitarian visas in Poland and in Lithuania mainly. But then in 2022, like the very same people were seen as a threat to the nation, a threat to the EU, because again, like the geopolitical situation shifted, and these people were kind of regarded as unworthy of protection. But it's just, I think, quite interesting to think how these constructions are not kind of carved in stone, but things can quickly change regarding kind of depending on kind of where your government is being positioned.
Yes. So this is kind of an argument that when we all have this intersectional positionality that many are for sure familiar with, like different things like gender, class, ethnicity, so-called race or skin color, but especially, or I also don't want to use the language that especially in this time, because then I'm repeating this exceptional, but probably always it was like this, that geopolitics actually could be added as one part of the intersectional positionality, because if some part of your identity is such that can be used on the state level to classify people, then probably at some point it will use, then suddenly because of some events of that on national level you become a second-class citizen. And indeed the examples that we gave before portrays how race and geopolitics are instrumentalized by governments in specific period, a specific time, in order to push for harder border politics and restrict people's movements. And also what was interesting that, of course, Finland has a lot of Russian speakers and Russian migrants, but since the Russian full-scale invasion in Ukraine, we had two big flows of people coming from Russia. One was straight after in February 2022, and another one was in September 2022 also, probably, when Russia called for mobilization. And many of people who came were perceived as male. And in Finnish news, it was a lot of this kind of revoking of the Second World War trauma of Russian males coming to Finland. And this is also an example of how now then gender is also kind of used at this to build the enemy image, to build a kind of an image of a threat. And in the end, of course, then also these kind of migration from Russia after the full-scale war started was in the end kind of building up into the same policies of closing the borders. And of course also in terms of migration from Russia, already before the border closure, they suspended the visas and severely restricted possibilities to visit, for instance, your relatives or travel to Finland. And also this is very interesting if you compare to black and brown migrants and black and brown asylum seekers, because in Finnish, even mainstream media, especially in 2015, when a lot of people escaped wars and came to different parts of Finland, it's always mentioned that, but why is it only men that come? So again, this shows how gender is also just used in different situations to portray people that are escaping war, escaping authoritarian regimes, to portray them as threats.
Yeah, I could also add that according to the Finnish law, like fleeing draft, military drafting, is not considered as a ground for asylum. You can only kind of claim asylum if there is a risk that you are going to be involved in war crimes. And even though there are already the proof that Russia is conducting war crimes in Ukraine. Still, I think 70% of all asylum applications from Russian citizens are being rejected in Finland. And still, like the majority have been waiting for their decisions for asylum for over 2 years.
Yes, and Finnish Migration Office has also said that Russia is safe for queer people, which is, as we all know, it's not true.
Please come visit. No,
yes. But yeah, so as kind of these examples point out, what is portrayed as exceptions in time of crisis, at least in Finland, and I think also probably in your countries, this harsh border politics, othering of people, hierarchizing people in legal, in law, is portrayed as, okay, we now make exceptions because it's a crisis. But actually it's all in the end serving the carceral EU border apparatus, because we, as Daria mentioned in examples brought by her, that actually the dynamics are very similar in different EU countries. And also, so a small anecdote that came to mind with this exception, our social democrat Prime Minister Sanna Marin, that also was caught in this partying scandal, maybe some of you heard about her, but like that was really like, she's left, she's liberal. In addition to building this border fence, what this government did was they severely restricted nurses' rights to strike. And I think it was Sanna Marin herself that used the kind of the same language of exception. Because we live in times of war and threat of war, we cannot let the nurses strike. Which is ridiculous, because if you think there's war, what we need? Nurses, probably. Yeah, but so this language of exception is very popular amongst politicians.
Yeah, it's popular among politicians, but it's also getting like kind of normalized among some scholars. And here we would have a slide with an example of European Journal of Migration and Law, where one scholar, he's like a PhD in international law, but he's also a parliamentary ombudsman. How he really like published this peer-reviewed article, and it was published in this like good journal, where he discusses the possibility of democratically defined exceptions to the right to seek asylum in the context of instrumentalized migration. And if you have the nerves to read this article, he really starts with this kind of hypothetical situation, like what happens if asylum seekers come to the border with guns and with tanks. So it's literally his kind of the opening to the article. And it was really published, and like it was somebody really peer-reviewed it, and it's there, and kind of this person who is the parliamentary ombudsman is really seeking ways to democratically define exceptions to the right to seek asylum if asylum seekers come with guns and tanks. Yes, and then we wrote a response with a colleague to that. But yeah, just the point is kind of how easily and quickly this language becomes kind of normalized and widely spread amongst the public and also academics, without even kind of explaining like how exactly, what does it mean instrumentalized, like who is instrumentalizing whom, where is like the proof or that people are being instrumentalized. And also here we would show you some example. There are also very few examples available, or like stories of people who actually crossed the border. But the available stories that we have, they actually show that some of the people who were trying to cross the border with from Belarus or from Russia, they have been residing in Russia, for example, for a long time. For example, they were staying with student visas. They were like students and not living their lives. But then, like at some point, the Russian migration service wouldn't renew a residence permit to these people, and they would say like, you either going to be deported from the country or you will be sent to the war with Ukraine. And there are many stories like that, and I think it was quite discussed in the media that there are many people who are non-citizens in Russia or who are naturalized citizens, quite often from Central Asia, who received the letters forcing people to go to the war with Ukraine. But then you had this example.
Yes, and probably it's also worth to add that migrants and BIPOC Russians are severely overrepresented on the front and also in the kind of death statistics from Ukraine. So it's also a difficult topic because still they're occupational soldiers, but also somehow they're being used by Russian government. But yeah, this is different topic for different time. There also the Finnish national TV broadcaster made this short documentary film that was called Venäjän pelinappulat, so the pawns, kind of the board game pawns of Russia. And it was about two people that came at that time that were able to cross the border, and they were staying in a detention center in Finland. And basically, this short film was just about the lives of these people and how they came, how they lived in Russia. They came, I think both of them were from Syria in this film, and then they managed to travel to Russia. They stayed some time in Russia, and then they traveled to the border. There was nothing about hybrid warfare. There was nothing actually about unraveling any state level dynamics. It was just about the life of these people. But then calling it the pawns of Russia then kind of already contributes to another discourse. And I think what was this kind of also contributed to what Kamal said yesterday about black and brown bodies being not seen as worthy of humanitarian efforts. Because no one talked about that. Okay, even if these people are pawns of Russia or instruments of hybrid warfare, does it mean that they don't deserve protection? Does it mean that they don't deserve to live their lives, and that even if they are pawns of Russia, should Finland not be protecting them then from this? Yeah. No, it was not mentioned at all, which is really kind of beyond words horrible.
Yes, and then we would show you another example, and the text, which is written by Inga Hajdarowicz, who is part of Polish group, Grupa Granica, who is doing these humanitarian interventions and organizing on the Polish-Belarusian border. So Inga wrote this text about Syrian refugees from Lebanon and their stories. She interviewed them once they crossed the border to Poland, and there you also see that it's not necessary or not at all in those stories that these people have been in touch with any authorities, but they really found out that there was a possibility of crossing the border with Belarus, and they tried their luck because their conditions in Lebanon as Syrian refugees were getting worse. And of course, then the situation changed now with the fall of Assad regime. But I think what is important here is that with this whole discourse of instrumentalized migration, where it's really unclear who is instrumentalizing whom, it's very important to actually hear people's stories and see why people are moving. And one of the quotes says that no forest or wilderness will stop the desire for a dignified life. But also some evidence which is available to us from the Russian-Finnish border is that some of the people who already tried to cross the border with Belarus, from Belarus to Poland, and then they failed to do that. They were like beaten by the guards, and they were pushed back to Belarus, and then they found that there is a possibility to go to the border with Finland. Yes, and then we would finish this presentation with some of the organizing groups that are doing some work at the border, or some collectives have been also publishing the texts. So there is the Freedom of Movement Network, Vapaa Liikkuvuus in Finland. Then there is Grupa Granica. There is the Finnish blog Raster. .fi, which also publishes texts on this topic, and also researchers on the border, which is a Polish collective. And of course, we know that there are many more, and also in Latvia and Lithuania. It would be great to learn more about these initiatives here, and to get exchanges and to get organized together. Thank you. Thank you.
We have time for some questions, so I'd be very happy. We don't have.
Hi there. So that's time for questions and inputs. We have some hands here, and then people who never spoke before also are welcome to do so. And as we slowly circling in, let's begin from this part. We have enough time to answer one by one, and let's see how it goes further, right? We have enough time for everyone, I'm sure. Let's go right here. Here we go. Thank you. Here.
Hello, my name is Simonas. As you said that in past 5 years we saw article titles hybrid warfare incoming, and since I don't have time to get into all the facts, I just read the titles. Maybe you know more. So should I imagine that in Belarus, in Russia, there are the war generals where they think, let's make a new tactic of how to attack, let's use migrants? Is the war general thought about this, or just media just titled it in this way?
That's actually a very good question, and we were just talking about this. Also because in my profile in the university it says that I research Russian-speaking people in Finland, but still I get contacted by people and being like, do I want to tell about hybrid warfare? So when I answer like, it's in no part my expertise, I don't know anything, but like I follow a lot of Russian media and try to follow the information space there. I haven't seen anything about the kind of, at least public, about using different ways of or like kind of this hybrid technologies, but I'm sure they exist. I'm sure there are different ways of modern warfare. Also, Russia does do this hacker stuff a lot, and so it does exist. But also, even if it happens, then we should not forget kind of the human value of people who are used by these tactics. Maybe this is the only thing that I can say, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think to add to this, I could also add that I think it's important here to think how the language of hybrid warfare, I mean, it's the language of like military science and military field. And yes, there is like warfare, and which is not hybrid from Russia. I mean, it's not. There is nothing also hybrid about what Russia is doing in Ukraine, for example. But I think what is dangerous is kind of how easily, like now everything becomes hybrid warfare, and asylum seekers are also part of hybrid warfare, and it's just like this very kind of sexy and vague term. Nobody knows what it means, so we can just like drop it, and then supposedly it explains something, but yes, it's something like scary and it does its work. But then I think, like with the case of Belarus, that there is like evidence, kind of how the government did open new flight connections between Minsk and Baghdad, But also like what pushes people to come like to Minsk, and so there is also agency of people to come there themselves. And I think in 2022, after the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine, there was this discussion how we have to give agency to Ukraine, to Ukrainian people, nothing about Ukraine without Ukrainians. But at the same time, when we talk about let's call it like global south, then like suddenly these are the people without agency, they're being just pushed like wherever, they're just these pawns of Russia or used as these cogs of hybrid warfare. But yes, if Belarus did open new flight connections, but then also research shows that there are just like really like many private companies that started offering these services. And in case of Russia, we know that many people were just really living in Russia for a long time in completely also legal terms. To say like if they were also living there irregularly, that's kind of totally also fine. But and then with kind of how also the state can manipulate not only in Russia but everywhere by just taking away residence permits and pushing people like to the war in Ukraine. Yes.
Hey, thank you for your work and for your talk. It's really important, like to follow the basic human rights. And I have two questions comparing the situation with the Polish-Belarusian border. First one is the situation in detention centers, because in Poland is really bad. The situation in detention centers for asylum seekers who are crossing the border in Polish-Belarus through Polish-Belarusian border is really bad. And Polish ombudsman, which is luckily a little bit better, and she was better, she described it as worse conditions than in prison. And it's involuntary detention. It's really, really bad. And I think people are also forgetting about this in detention centers in Poland. And the second question is about the criminalization of help for the refugees, because this is a very big topic also in Poland, since people on the move or refugees, asylum seekers are crossing the border through this primal forest, which is very, very difficult. Very often those persons are not prepared and they just die in the forest. And so there are many people helping them, and they are criminalized and targeted by liberal and non-liberal governments. It's the same situation in Poland as you described. So I have those two questions about detention centers and the criminalization of help and activism. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. I think the difference between also Poland and Finland is that in Finland there are no people at the border. So this summer there was one person who crossed the border, and you wouldn't believe that it was a Ukrainian person who crossed the border to Russia. Yes, so there are also really currently like no people who are attempting to cross the border with Finland, because I think that the news got to people that it's now impossible to apply for asylum in Finland. And now, according to this new law, you can only apply for asylum in the airport or in the seaports. So you can't apply from the eastern border. But the people who did get in 2023, like over 1,000, I think maybe 400 people, something like that. They are like in reception centers, not in detention centers. Like in detention centers, you get like before you're being, I think, deported. But while you are waiting for your asylum decision, you are kept in the reception center. Yeah, and the same with the criminalization of help. Yes, we know about this situation with how also different forms of kind of humanitarian action were criminalized, and basically you really can't do anything. Just like give people some information and bring food or warm clothes in the forest, but then you really can't even give them a lift, like a ride by car, because you would be accused of smuggling. But in Finland, since there are no people at the border, it's not yet criminalized, but I think it will be easily become criminalized if the time comes, I'm sure.
Yes, and also to add, because now there's less people seeking asylum, then there's less need for reception centers, and our right-wing government, of course, already closes some down, leading to, for instance, I think third biggest city in Finland, Tampere, and the attained region, all of the reception centers, they have decision to close all of them, so there will not be any reception centers in this area anymore.
Yeah, and instead of allowing people to apply for asylum, of course, like all these possibilities are like shrinking and shrinking. They expect people to apply for work permits. And before this government, actually, we were kind of supporting people and saying like, okay, you're applying for asylum, and of course it's very difficult to get asylum, and it's very like unjust system of the whole asylum. And then we would suggest, okay, but you can back yourself up by applying for a work permit. So again, like how we think about this like border regimes and categories, like many people who are staying in the country on work permits, who are kind of labor migrants, in a different system, they would be categorized as asylum seekers and they would get asylum status. But now with this government, you can't apply. If you're applying for asylum and you get rejected, you can't apply for a work permit anymore. So it can be even safer if you want to get regularized to apply for a work permit. And again, you see, we're just like kind of channeling people, kind of how the state channels people to these particular categories of migrants to become workers. Yeah.
Wow, right. So could you raise hands, all of us who have anything to... No, not anymore. Perfect. We have one hand. Any more hands down there? Sorry, I'm a bit low here. Okay, cool. So one closing question and then we move on. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I'm Vuk from Sienos Group at a local organization, so get in touch later. So just one comment and one question. The comment was about Finland. I felt, you mentioned Finnish nation building was very anti-Russian, but I know, or I've read that it was very much anti-Swedish in the early 19th century, and later it was very pro-East, romanticized sauna culture. And I was always thinking of Finland as this, that this discourse kind of kept Finland from being totally Huntington, we are the West. And that's why everything that's happening now is so strange, actually. That's just something to think about. My question about the language of hybrid warfare. So in Lithuania, it's become, I don't know, it's such a terrible monster right now. So now there is a whole aspect of espionage. So one thing that triggered the negative attitudes towards Belarusian citizens wasn't just what you mentioned there, it was also that they actually found some spies amongst I think it was almost 100,000 Belarusians. I mean, there's going to be some spies. There were before that, and like they were, hi, now we have to close the asylum stuff because of the spies. But still, people are getting work permits from Belarus to drive trucks in the tens of thousands. So actually, they don't care about this. So for me, it seems like the whole language is becoming about hatred and hatred for migrants, and it's actually not effective. Do you see anything similar in Finland? Is like, how does it develop, or is it now stagnant because of lack of asylum seekers? So, thank you.
Maybe I'll start with this Finnish nation building. Excellent point, thank you. Yes, it's true that, of course, there were also different groups that were building Finnish nationalism in different way, and also it's not like people come together like, okay, let's build nationalism, and these are the terms. It's kind of also born, and of course there was some type of Finnishness already before the idea of a nation state, but still I can say that while difference from Russianness or from Easternness in general is kind of existential, then difference from Swedishness is built in more in a practical way. It's like, Swedes do this, but Finns do this in their own way. But yeah, this is a long topic. But yeah, I think your point was really good.
Yeah, and I think there are also these hierarchies that kind of Sweden is seen as this like local center of the Nordic countries, Scandinavia. It's the strongest kind of power, and everybody wants to be like Sweden. Yes, but about espionage, and of course, like it's very securitized, the whole language, and of course, migration has been like very securitized. Whoever comes is always like a security threat. But again, like if we think of 2015, there was this language about ISIS. So there was always like some threat coming. But the point is, and with all these examples of kind of how the borders were being closed down, or not closed down, but they are trying to close down the borders, but people are still coming, and that's how some scholars call it autonomy of migration, that no matter how much kind of the state will try to suppress the movement is always primary. Yes.
Yeah, maybe also to add a personal example about espionage. My father, that has a Russian name, doesn't hide his Russian background, has been living in Finland for 25 years and works as a programmer, was questioned by the Finnish like suojelupoliisi, what it's like interior... security police because of like a project he was working in, the coding firm he's in, and they also said that they are questioning everyone. Well, that was not true. They were questioning him for 3 hours, asking, for instance, what do his children do, listing all his friends, listing everyone he knows with Russian passport. 60-year-old man knows a lot of people along his life. So yeah, this is also like made me a little bit question the effectiveness of the Finnish security police, because maybe the spy won't be living openly with Russian name and Russian passport, and yeah. So, but of course they're spies, but maybe they're not among these people that are looked at. And also, as I see it, only as kind of first the message to the Russian population that you are being watched, but second as message of Finnish population that then there's nice report like, oh, we checked this amount of people, we found this amount of spies, and people maybe feel a bit safer. Okay, thank you so much. Indeed, as mentioned by Daria before, we would love to hear experience, agreement, disagreement. Would love to get networked with similar-minded people from different countries. So please approach us later. And thank you so much for your questions and attention.